So there are parallels for me in terms of this region. The regions that we've been looking at this week are incredibly rich in natural resources. They have the fresh water, the ocean, the minerals, the oil and the gas, the forests as well. But there are challenges for business in terms of maximising the use of those resources, challenges associated with how small, medium-sized enterprises innovate in small communities, challenges in terms of how those businesses attract and retain the skills and competencies that they need. But also there is a policy challenge for regions such as these as well, in terms of how you create the institutional arrangements which can influence those factors, particularly institutional arrangements which help facilitate relationships, networks and collaborations between the different actors involved, being the business and different government institutions too. And in particular, being a remote region, how you then communicate your priorities to a national and to a European level and build the relationships which are necessary for that as well. So we have 5 speakers here today that will cover those kinds of issues. As we've outlined before, we're not pressed for time, but we have time constraints. We have a lot of speakers, so we'll try and keep it to about 12 to 15 minutes each, and then hopefully there'll be a chance for a bit of Q&A afterwards and some discussion with the audience. So I'd like to introduce Andrew Kirkenes, who is from the Hutton Institute and Nord Regio as well, and he will present now, and then we'll have the other speakers. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come to this absolutely fascinating place that was just a name for me until today. So, I'm going to share some ideas with you about opportunities and potentials for development in the NSPCA. Sorry, NSPA, I get confused there. Anybody from the UK would understand why I'm putting a C in there. Anyway. As was mentioned, I have a 50-50 split of my time between the James Hutton Institute, which is a Scottish Government-funded research institute in Aberdeen, and Nord Regio in Stockholm. Maybe it's a little bit late for a definition, late in the afternoon, but this was a definition of the northern sparsely populated areas, which comes from a Nord Regio report in 2005. It combines population density with accessibility to main centres of population, so it's not simply based on population density. And one of the reasons why I included it here was just to point out that North and West Scotland qualifies under this definition. I'm going to come back at the end to speak a little bit about some work in Scotland. Taken as a whole, I think it's fair to say that the NSPA is characterised by processes of depletion, economic and social depletion. In the case of these maps, it's depletion in terms of population, but we could also talk about depletion in terms of skills and human capital because of selective out-migration of younger people and people with higher educational qualifications. We could talk about the concept of wealth and added value leaving the region because of having an economy where you are to a large extent exporting raw materials. So some of the, you could actually retain that value within the region perhaps. So a few years ago we worked on a typology of European regions, which was supposed to be about performance, economic and social performance. And the two extremes of performance, of regional performance, were accumulation on the one side and depletion on the other. So the northern sparsely populated areas are very much in the depletion end of the scale. But there is some evidence, as we heard in the first presentation this afternoon, there is always evidence of positive trends in small localized areas. And you can see the blue areas on the map on the left-hand side there, which reminds us that it's not, the NSPA is not without potential, and we need to seek out opportunities and potential rather than compensating for disadvantages in our policies. Just thinking a little bit about what we mean by regional competitiveness, I don't know whether you recognise this face. It's actually Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate economist, and he famously once said, so if you hear someone say something along the lines of America needs higher productivity so that it can compete in today's global economy, never mind who he is or how plausible he sounds, he might as well be wearing a flashing neon sign that reads, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, we're not Nobel laureate economists, so I'm going to use the term regional competitiveness in a rather loose, pragmatic kind of way. In the context of the NSPA, I think it seems to be mostly about reversing these processes of depletion, maintaining or increasing the capacity to generate wealth and to keep it here. To identify the potentials for growth, we need a clear diagnosis of the issues which are holding the NSPA back. The value of a meeting like this, is an opportunity to bring together the worlds of research and practice, which are often very separate and don't talk to each other very much, and we can share tacit knowledge. The dangers of not connecting research and practice are that you can have policy which is left behind by theory. It's based on an out-of-date concept or an out-of-date theory, or you can have policy which is based on a simplistic caricature of a theory. So, in rural development circles, the link between policy and the theory behind it, tends to be known as the intervention logic. And in my presentation, I'm first of all going to talk about a broad range of intervention logics which may be appropriate in the NSPA context. Then I'm going to talk about smart specialization strategies as a useful way to organize them. I'm then going to talk about two issues which are particularly worth considering, two theoretical issues, if you like, which are particularly worth considering in the context of the NSPA, and I'm going to finish off with an example from Scotland. So on this slide I've got a list of intervention logics which could be appropriate in the NSPA. It's not exhaustive, I'm sure you could add to it. Some of these are older and becoming less popular, and some of them are newer and are untried, if you like. The first group that are on the screen at the moment tend to be those associated with regional policy and are mostly from an economic theoretical perspective. The second group are associated with rural development policy across Europe. As we all know, that regional development and rural development policy tend to be two separate silos, and they have their own set of intervention logics. And the rural development ones are also, they come from economics, they come from sociology, they owe something to geography as well. Smart specialisation strategies, and those of you who are from Finland and Sweden will recognise the term because it's very much part of the European Structural and Investment Fund structure. Every regional development plan requires to have a smart specialisation strategy. Smart specialisation strategies are better suited to the northern sparsely populated areas than the previous structures, research and innovation strategies. And there are at least 3 reasons for that. First of all, they have a broader, more inclusive concept of innovation. It's not just about technological innovation, it includes innovation in terms of services, social innovation, marketing innovation, and so on. We heard a little bit about that in one of the previous presentations. Secondly, because of this, they're less dependent on metropolitan research hubs than the old model of research and innovation strategies. And thirdly, they are very flexible containers. They allow a balance of intervention logics which reflects the specifics of the regional context. So what might be the most appropriate components of an NSPA smart specialisation strategy in terms of innovation logics? Well, they might move away a little bit from the traditional focus on infrastructure, which is certainly still an important basis, a framework condition, but maybe that it's not the whole story. They should move away from compensation for disadvantage, perhaps. They could accommodate the issues around resource-based industries and inward investment, commodification of public goods through tourism, for example. Another intervention logic which is often talked about is the city-region approach. I'm going to speak a little bit about this in a minute. The city-region approach needs to be extended in order to tackle what are known as backwash effects. And then community-led local development, CLLD, could be part of them. Perhaps sparsity inhibits the process of social innovation, which is the driver of CLLD. But then again, as we heard in the first presentation this afternoon, there are other forms of proximity, social proximity, which can compensate perhaps for sparsity in community-led local development. Now I'm going to talk about the first of the 2 theoretical issues or conceptual issues which I would like to highlight as deserving special attention from policy practitioners in the NSPA. The point is that if you read the recent policy literature on urban-rural cooperation and interaction and city-region strategies, all you seem to read about is the positive spread effects that benefit the immediate surroundings of cities. However, if you go back into the literature of the 50s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, there was an equal recognition then of something called backwash effects, negative effects from the city. In fact, the problem for the NSPA is that backwash effects are dominant here, leading to depletion of population, skills, profits, even export of energy, which could be perhaps made use of by industries within the regions. So it seems to me that the policy challenges associated with the fact that the backwash effects seem to be neglected in the literature is that the NSPA policy needs to tackle out-migration, develop regional supply trains and clusters to retain economic benefits within the regions, and to find ways to use the surplus energy. The second big area of concepts and theories which need to be thought about quite carefully and incorporated into the intervention logics for regional policy in the NSPA is about new forms of communication and flows of information and different concepts of proximity. We're still waiting for the death of distance, which was predicted in the early 1990s, I think, and for the weakening of the focus of agglomeration, forces of agglomeration of economic activity. There hasn't been any dramatic reversal, but there are signs of selective incremental changes. We've heard about developments in e-health already this afternoon. There's a whole new vocabulary in the literature of strange things like connexity, globalization, organized proximity, which actually was mentioned already this afternoon, distributed economy, non-Euclidean space, translocal globalization, which you can't read because it's in yellow. So there's a whole new vocabulary out there. It's also very much a hot political issue in Scotland as well as presumably in the NSPA. So new information and communications technology has had a selective impact. Peripherality is still a very powerful constraint, but it's been partially reconfigured, presenting a range of new opportunities in the NSPA. In order to understand this subtle shift in which is going on, one way we can do that is to analyse patterns and trends of economic performance, distinguishing between accessible and remote areas. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about some research we have been doing in Scotland. Scotland has a six-fold classification of its 6,000 data zones. It has 6,000 small data zones. And this six-fold classification of these small data zones includes urban, small town, rural. And the small town and the rural are then subdivided into remote and accessible. So what we did, we produced something called a socio-economic performance index, which I won't go into detail. There are copies of this short two-page document explaining it, and if you go on the web, there's a longer document you can download. But we scored each of the data zones on a 1 to 10 scoring system on the basis of 18 socio-economic indicators. And then we were able to compare socio-economic performance in these small data zones in 2001 and 2011 and see what changes were taking place in different parts of Scotland. And what we found was that small town performance declined between 2001 and 2011, but rural performance improved. And accessible rural improvement and small town decline we explained mainly in terms of spread effects from the largest cities, and spread effects out of the small towns into the countryside immediately around them. And the remote rural improvement, we thought this was a pretty complex phenomenon. We don't really have a simple explanation of it, but it's at least partly due to information and communication technologies facilitating sort of non-spatial proximity and breaking down the disadvantage of distance, if you like. And the policy implication for Scotland, well, what we told the Scottish Government was that they needed to have different forms of intervention in the accessible rural parts of Scotland from the remoter areas, because there are two different processes going on in these two parts of Scotland, so you have to have a different intervention logic. So, this is just a sum up of what I've said. I've said that smart specialisation is a helpful concept in the NSPA. I've said that we need to recognise research and create policy to ameliorate backwash effects. And thirdly, I've said that proximity or new forms of proximity, we need to acknowledge them, monitor them, and exploit the incremental changes which are taking place. Thank you very much. There are a few copies of this document outside on the table by the copy.
Thank you, Andrew. I think in particular setting out those theoretical frameworks are particularly useful for policymakers in understanding why we intervene, and also this issue about ICT and the role it may play in terms of overcoming some of these issues of distance. So I'd like to introduce Knut Onsega, who is a Senior Advisor at the Norwegian Ministry of Local Government and Modernisation.
Thank you for the invitation to this interesting seminar. My name is Knut Onsega, and I'm working as an advisor in the Division of Regional Policy, and have been working there for as long as 6 months. I'm a step-in for my supervisor Vincent Fleischer. But I should try to say something about the main elements of the Norwegian regional policy. But before that, I will give a very short overview of some regional structures and trends which are well known for many of you, but I can repeat some of them. When we see Norway and the Nordic countries in European context, they are have very low population density, as other speakers have been talking about, and a weak urban structure. Despite of these structures, the Norwegian and Nordic countries have high GDP per capita and low unemployment as for until the last year in Norway too. But the Nordic context, Norway also had a better performance than all the Nordic neighbors, also in the periphery. But there have been differences in between east and west, south and north, and core and periphery. But the picture has been very low unemployment in Norway until last year, where the pattern is somewhat changing, which not like on also this picture, but the reduced oil prices and weaker currency are going to make another picture of the unemployment in the different regions in Norway. The last 5 years, the last 2-3 years, the unemployment level in Norway have increased, while it had decreased in the northern countries. Another well-known aspect with the Nordic countries is the ongoing centralization and high population growth, especially in Norway, and a better regional balance in Norway. Yes, this shows only the population level in the Norwegian age zones and the rest of the country from 1995 to 2015, and it shows that in the regional age zones that I will come back to what that is. The population level have been stable at the same level, while the other parts of the country have growth, and those parts are mainly the large city regions. From 2006-07, there have been an increasing growth in the population in Norway, and from 2009 also in northern Norway and different regional aid zones, which in both cases are due to the increased working immigration to Norway. When we look at the demographic components over the last 5 years in northern Norway, behind the population growth, we see that northern Norway have had a substantial negative net migration to other parts of Norway. But that is more than compensated by net immigration from outside of the country. And the picture is overall most the same in the parts of Norway, but this is maybe a larger challenge to northern Norway than other parts of the country, that the population have a very high turnover time. And before we go to policy, just some figures about the structures which are well known. That 64% of the population in the northern countries are living in small city regions or more peripheral regions with more sparsely populated areas, while in the rest of the country, or the country in total, the same share is 26. And we see also that there are a centralization process in the northern Norway in the growth of the population. Now I should say something about main elements in the regional policy. overall aim with the regional policy in Norway is to sustain a form of territory balance. And this has been expressed by three sub goals or sub aims, which have been gone through for many white papers. And these are sustain the main feature of the settlement pattern, utilize the natural resources in the whole country for highest possible national level value added, secure equal living conditions, and give everyone the freedom to choose where to settle. It is very wide goals. The regional policy can also be described in 5 elements, main elements. The first is the regional differentiated labor tax. As I go little into that afterwards. The second is the instruments related to business and community development. And the third is the action zone in Finnmark and North, which also have targeting individuals and not only business. And infrastructure is an important aspect, but a relatively small part of the total budget, in which are administered by the Ministry of Local Government and Assessment. And the Ministry has also the coordination responsibility to different sector policies, and that is a challenging field. Very much of very important regional effects are related to national sector dynamism and policies which lie outside the Ministry of Local Government and organization. The most important is the income system for the municipalities. Fishery, agriculture, and agriculture policy are also laying outside of this ministry, very important for the regional development in these industries. Knowledge, education, and R&D, and localization of state institutions, communication, and healthcare. When you look at the first main element of the regional policy is the regional differentiated labor tax, which amount for about 14 billion crowns a year, and where the more peripheral the region is, greater is the reduction in the employer's tax for social security. And in the red part of northern Finnmark, it is zero. The second part of the policy is related to supporting business and community development, and there are 3 main objectives related to different instruments here, and the first and the largest one is related to the business and industrial development, enhanced competitiveness, innovation, capability, and entrepreneurship. And here are also many of these cluster programs. And the second one field is to develop the framework for business development related to infrastructure and accessibility. And the third one is related then to attractive towns and places. This element of for the policy is about total 2 billion crowns per year. 2 billion crowns a year. And the administration and distribution, the administration and implementation structure is a bit complex. So I only listed them here by agency, where the consequences are the most important, and Innovation Norway. But we have also the CIVA institution, which serve incubators and business gardens. Research Council of Norway, which have programs for regional innovation and the like. And the micro program, which supports shops in the rural areas. One center for competence on rural development, district center. Also, and then the ministry has some programs and for international cooperation. This instrument and the budget allocation is have also a clear redistribution profile related to increasing territoriality. Yes. Action zone. We should only take the evidence from this. The specific with the action zone is that the instrument is targeting both business and individuals. And evaluation which have been done shows that the effects are surprisingly very good when it comes to the individual targetings, while it is more insecure when it comes to business and industry. Finally, only some changes which have been on this field over the last years. There have been a budget reduction in the regional policy spending to about 1/3 over 3 years, with the current government, the right-wing government, which have prioritized tax relief and road investment instead. In the policy field, it has been increased focus on, and that have gone beyond before the last government. With increased focus on cities and towns in regional development and cities as functional and sustainable regions, and the knowledge infrastructure and knowledge-intensive business development. Yes, and we are in different administrative reforms in a way, as many of you know much about, and which also will have impacts on the regional distribution of government jobs. And 2 white papers are in the way, or in process. One on the regional folkevalgt nivå, mellomnivå, and political elected regional medium level government, and a new white paper on cities and peripheral regions in 2027.
Thanks, Knut. I'd like to introduce Malfred Baig from the Northern Research Institute. She's a strategic marketing director there. Just a mistake, but thank you, Knut. I think just outlining the range of organisations, actors, instruments involved in regional policy, and again the importance of those institutions that help give some coherence to that at a regional level, but maybe we can follow that in the discussion.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to share some ideas. I have seen the impressive program for the OECD member Norwegian coast, and I suppose you also have a quite rough journey. So, since I'm a very kind person, I like to give you some mercy because this is the last day and the last session. So my presentation, I will keep it simple and short. No heavy data or statistics. And my position in Norut, I got it only 1 month ago. So Knut, you are experienced and old in the game actually. And as you know, there are some traditional theory about regional development or innovation systems, and you reckon these kind of bullet points. We know that if we succeed in achieving more research and development in private and public sector, we will increase employment and value in the north. And as you recognize from the slide, there is specific identification of so-called critical factors for establishing business clusters and regional innovation systems. And you know, the condition within the region is of course very important. For instance, culture for innovation and the geographic gathering of business, which make operation easier, as you know, is also an critical factor. Cluster of business gives increased growth and innovation. We all know that, and also that the thickness of the regions they call, it's like where you find clusters of business, institutions of education and researchers, and populated area is also very important for getting and establish innovation systems. And also national policy reflects these kind of theories through their instruments like Norwegian Center of Expertise, Global Center of Expertise, and so on. But as you know, there are some challenges. We do not have big and strong business clusters. We even don't have SME or small and medium-sized enterprises, but we have general small and tiny small companies. And we do not even have this kind of cultural innovation, neither in private sector or in the public sector. But this is a pattern, I think, it's not specific for Northern Norway. And we know that in tiny small enterprises with less than 10 employees, the companies in North Norway show the lowest rate of R&D activities. So we also know that studies show the gap between logical thinking and behavior between R&D institution and the industry. So it refers to the time perspectives, type of knowledge, orientation and organization, as previous speakers has pointed out. So, as I have mentioned, national policy and instrument are based on this general knowledge and principle and theory of innovation and business development. But the question is how to implement theory in the real field where the conditions do not reflect the premises. Do we have to make new maps? Or do we have to actually face the fact to facilitate regional development in general and also facilitating business development? We need also to consider the context, the local and the regional context. And of course we have those instruments because same way, I see a tendency where you remove instruments, fundings from regional governments to Norwegian, public or stately governmental bodies to run bigger programs based on general innovation theory. And I think in that picture you will lose the potential of growth in Northern Norway and other sparkly park areas. I will not go too deep in the action zone since my previous speaker showed it, but I really like the term action show in English because in Norwegian it's you get quite sad when you hear the term in Norwegian, but action zone sounds like it rules. And some of the goals for the action zone actually is to recruit skilled labor. So that takes me to the second point I like to stress. Because as you know, during the sessions in the week, I suppose you have been well aware about the natural resources, but in the end, it will always be the most important resources is the human capital. You are all familiar with these bullet points, and you have been discussed it during the program, so I will not put more effort in it, but nevertheless, these are very important challenges that we have to address and stress to our politicians and also to the public sector. So I like to end this short presentation to sum it up like I think that the key factor is actually diversity. The importance of diversity in governmental programs and arrangement, which also facilitate regional development based on different regional strengths and possibilities. And one of the biggest challenges in the future is the mismatch between the need of skilled labor force in private and public sector and declining population in working age. This is a national and international trend. However, it makes it even more essential to achieve attractive local communities. The battle of recruiting competent workforce will be more intense in the future. And we're talking about recruiting and diverse labor force in age, in skills, in gender, in nationality, and so on. So that makes it even harder, or you can flip it and say this makes the future very excited. We have to be able to compete and appear as attractive. And in the same way, we have to balance between our identity, heritage, history, which make us unique and also attractive. In the same way, we have to also balance it with diversity, considering labor market, public service, culture, different lifestyles, because that makes us also attractive. I do not have any answer how we make this, but it's of course very easy to address this question to our politicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Under time as well. I think your insights about the framework we use for innovation is really valuable. That these frameworks for innovation emerge from places like northern Italy or southern Germany that aren't necessarily reflect how innovation may operate So I would like to introduce Hans Hedlund, who has been my timekeeper, so I'm sure he will keep on time. He's a member of the Regional Committee of the County Council of North.
Thank you very much. Are you tired? Are you waiting for a drink? I have my two civil servants here. They have tried to teach me to speak the world's most common language, bad spoken English. So I hope you will understand me. Right now, I've been for all too long time, I've been a member of the County Council of Norway. For a year ago, I was the vice chairman of the border, but then there was an election, and now I'm just a member of the border. That happens for us in the politics. I'm glad to be here as everybody else, and I will talk a little of the northern region of Sweden and a little bit more of the middle region, Western Norway and Jämtland Härjedalen, but most of Western Norway. This is the points that the national policy for regional growth. It's 4 areas that they want us to work with out in the regions. So if we are going to have some central money, or if you just want to be kind of through our region as a central government, that it's very important that we work with this for pieces. As you already know, we talked about it earlier, but the coasts in Sweden, there we have many people and we have many big companies. It's in paper, wood and mechanical engineering. In the more sparsely populated areas, it's the big companies, it's mines of course, but even in tourist there are some big companies, also very many small. And what we are trying to do is to work about how they better can compete on the international market and the local market. This is what we also are working in local in the county of Western Norway. Innovation, accessibility, provision, and the human being is as a driver for growth. If you don't have the human with you and they don't believe in what they are doing, it's less matter what we are doing from the public. I hope to, with this presentation, show you how we are trying to prepare our SMEs and beginners how to compete out there, because it's a tough world. There are the different companies and who are out there. This is nothing you should learn or read, but this is a way to show how we try to get public organization and other organization, NGOs you can call them, and companies to work together so that we will learn about the market, and that we will know how we should go out and work with other companies. And this is not just on Western Norway, you see we have also some connection with region Västerbotten. This is a company who is the government, central government owns the most, Almi, and the region Västerbotten and Jämtland Härjedalen is also owned about a little less than the half. And this is what they are doing. They help you with advertise loans and venture capitals. And their vision you can read to create opportunities for these companies. And I want you to look at the second point. They have 37 increase in turnover and 23 increase of the number of employees 3 years after. So it's very good numbers. And now we have another great thing that we are very proud of, which we call Åkrosen Business Incubator. Åkrosen Business, they are helping beginners with all that they need. It can be paper, computers, and that things. And when you are very small and you're feeling alone, it is a very good company to start companies. And you see, and then if you're talking about euro or you're talking about Norwegian crowns, it don't matter so much. They have one invested is 10 times back. And just to show how they now are building up their organization, they starting in every municipality in Western Norway, but we also have help from community outside Stockholm, Kirkenes, and what we call soft landings, and that is Berlin and Riga, so that we really should help all this small business. And I just got a mail today from Åkrosen, and there were 2 women who had an idea in 2013 that they should go together, all small clothes stores, and if they go together they got better prices when they dealing with manufacturing, so that they can compete with the large clothes stores as Stadium and H&M. And it was 2 years ago, 2013, now 2015, there are 150 stores who are connected to this idea, and they call themselves unique stores. And this is a picture of how we work together with other regions and other countries. Oh yes, nice. And this is a word. I should have tried this before. And just how much they really work. I especially wanted to notice that they drink 18,249 cups of coffee. I don't know how they count it, but I believe on what they had. And this, to them, is a picture of Joe Cocker. He is singing the famous song from Beatles, I Can Need a Little Help from a Friend. And
prepared my presentation, I was not sure to concentrate on this regional development and business development or connections to the infrastructure, and I did it so that I have quite general slides, but I concentrate on my presentations. So I have 2 lines. I try to show the one is suitable for different things. But I have 3 starting points. Our Finnish Minister of Finance always has 3 starting points or 3 points. So I'll start these points. And first of these points, I would like to say something about this. We are calling in Finland some kind of big regional policy and the small regional policy. So it's the question about transport infrastructure. It's a question of educational system and structures. It's a question of business development structures, but it's also the question of how to deliver the services, the grants to regions and the municipalities. And this is some kind of complexity, like we heard in the Norwegian presentation. Another thing is how we see an NSPI area. So we see that this is so we have a lot of potential in the whole area. So we have a natural-based economy, its background, bioeconomy, mining and extractive industries, tourism, and so on. So we have a lot to offer to other parts of the Europe and the world. And the third one is this Finnish Chamber of Commerce made survey a couple of years ago, and they asked of the business and enterprises which are the most important factors to business development, location and operating environment. First one was the skilled labor force. Second one was the transport connections and accessibility, and the third one was the safe and attractive environment. This is some kind of a base for my presentation. So first of all, the North Karelia, I think it's just because I'm coming from the southern part, maybe the NSPI area, so I'll come from the region of North Karelia. So we have around 160,000 inhabitants. We have a border with Russia, so like you have here in Kirkenes, we have also the border with Russia. And so if you look at the business structure of our region, so I would say that innovation and business development structures are quite well. I think it's quite typical in Finland that our example. So we have a science park in Joensuu. So we have a regional business development agencies. We have 3 altogether in our regions. So we have a University of Applied Sciences, and vocational training systems. And then we are specialized in forest research. This means that European Forest Institute, National Forest Institute, and so on is located in our region. So we have 13 municipalities. This is an example of the forest biocluster, and we will see in our region that forest biocluster is a driver. So we have in our cluster, as we call in North Karelia, around 500 companies, 6,000 jobs, turnover is 1.7 billion euros. But what is very important for the regional development is also that we have 600 specialists. This means that in university, our polytechnics, this National Research Institute, and so on. And then especially in renewable energy, we have about 1,350 jobs. But in this picture, you see this cluster, and I think it's some kind of cooperation between the administration, public administration, between the business, between the research institutes, and between the universities, and this kind of. This is very active cluster we have. So maybe it's an example of what we are doing. I think it's quite typical in Finland, this kind of clusters. Then I'll come to the Finnish system. So left-hand side you'll see the central administration line, and right-hand side the local and regional administration line. So at the moment we have in Finland 19 regions, but it's starting some kind of reform for the region. We'll see what happens next in a few next years. This idea is discussion has started to form a new self-government bodies. So we don't at the moment have any directly elected bodies in the regions, but in future we might have that kind of body, some kind of self-government bodies. Then the left-hand side is this governmental actions, and there have been some actions or national programs. It has also included the NSP area in the Finnish side. First of all, I'd like to mention it was a couple of years ago. It was Glance to the Future, so it's some kind of special program for East and North Finland. It was planned together with the central administration and the region. Unfortunately, it's a strategic program, but unfortunately there were not funding included this program. So we'll see how it implemented in the next few years. Another thing is called innovative cities. It's called INCA program. So idea is to how to develop the innovative structures in the special fields in Finnish cities and city regions, and then also the growth agreements. But the idea is that we have the national programs and national strategies, and we have local programs and national, and the idea is the development plans of the regions to make the synergy of these both. So it's also the bottom-up approach included. Then some words of the comparing the national and regional policies. This left-hand side, so we in Finland started new government this spring, and it's called Prime Minister Sipilä's government, and he's come from the North Norway European, so he's from the NSP area. For a long time, the Finnish focus has been to strengthen the competitiveness of the Finland and strengthen the expertise, and a lot of efforts has been put on to innovation systems and research and innovation systems. And this is the idea now that this new government national government has some kind of special actions, but also connected to funding. There, I don't know if you can see all the small text, but I'll read them. So one is employment and competitiveness, skills and education, well-being and health, bioeconomy and clean solutions, and then digitalization, experimentation and regulations. And the right-hand side, you'll see this our regional development. This is North Karelian example. We have also made a special smart specialization strategy, as was mentioned earlier. Our specialties in our region are the forest, bioeconomy, technology and material, and also the Russia. But if you compare this national and regional strategies, we'll see quite well that they are in line. So I cannot say on behalf of all the Finnish regions, but if I look at the North Karelian side, there are a lot of similarities. There's national goals and also the regional goals. But what is in practice? So the goals are in line and actions merely too. The problem is at the moment Finnish economy, it's not in good shape, so we'll see how much funding it's for its action Also the structures and mechanisms are I would say that I in a good shape. You mean the funding systems, regional business development structures. The problem is maybe the subsidiarity. Do we have the near possibility to make decisions concerning people? Maybe it's coming a bigger structures of the administrations and persons who are making decisions concerning the business development, they are maybe not so near as it has been. Another thing is the regulation. We'll see how much it's. We are part of the European Union. We have our own Finnish regulations. They are not easy to so maybe we have some need to some kind of reform also the regulations, but also the experimentations. We have some problems at the moment, and I learned this, listened this Westernoland example, how to get this seed money. We have the venture capital systems, we have loan systems, and innovation technology funding systems, but not so that found the seed funding or early stage funding to develop business. At the regional level, we have got that kind of solutions. We have a special growth programs for that kind of activities, but that's not enough. Just few things about the regional and national level. The structural funds and European Union funding is extremely important. Also the NSP area. So about the Finnish structural funds program, around 300 million euros per year goes 2/3 to the NSP area. And the Kirkenes, which is the Finnish technology and innovation program, they have at the national level around 500 million euros, and this structural funds around 300 million euros. This 500 million euros for technological innovations. So it goes around 16% to NSP area. About half of it goes to the Helsinki area. So it's a need for our business and enterprise to be taken in with this innovation system and get funding also with that source. Then I would like to conclude what I started. So as NSP area, we have a lot of possibilities, and natural resources are one of these possibilities. And this is just a picture of the mines in Finland, industrial mineral and gemstone mines and metallic ore mines. So you'll see that it's located in the eastern and northern part of Finland. We have some in our region in North Karelia, we have some gold mines and copper mines and so on. But this is one possibility as option what we have in future. I think that was all. Thank you.
I'd like to invite all our participants up to the front, please, to take some questions. While I'm talking, just think about what sort of questions you might want to ask. We've heard about the importance of innovation, the central importance of relationships to that, the range of policy instruments, practical ways of promoting it, and how you might do that, particularly working in partnership, again, both at a regional and a national level. So, asking a question, if you could just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and yeah, you've got that opportunity now. So, are there any questions? Okay.
Yes, North Norway European Office again. I was particularly interested in the first that you, Andrew, showed us. And my thinking when it comes to smart specialization, as you put that as one important issue to look into, that's S3 initiative on the EU level, isn't really one of the smart specializations for the regions as such and for the whole NSPA cooperation. Very much this that we have been talking about today, that yes, we are few, but we are close, connected to each other. If you just, I mean, what we're discussing today is the connections, but if we can solve that in different ways, then we have close to each other, we have close between different clusters, we have strong clusters in raw materials, in woods, in minerals, but also growing creative sector, which I think is one of the sectors we need to promote in different ways. We have easy to connect between different actors as we are here. I mean, we're from the politics, we're from the academia, we're from different aspects, including the enterprises, which maybe not are so much here today, but otherwise close connected, both global companies and very small companies. And we have a tradition of working together, and all those three different ways of collaborations in itself create some sort of innovation triangle, which needs, as we discussed before, this oxygen into this. But I think, because when talking smart specialization is often looked upon and what sectors are we to promote and what are we best in, and there we should be even better in the future, even though we do not know what the future will point out. So it's more a general question, but I think it's still quite interesting to see isn't there some sort of smart specialization in the innovation system that we can work that are very much different from other areas, such as in a million city with 1,000 years of university. Think what we can do compared to that.
Yeah, I think that's I think you expressed quite well a lot of the things that lay behind what I said. I mean, the point about smart specialization is that not everywhere can be Silicon Valley. That's often, the way it's introduced. That the concept of a research and innovation system, which is based on high technology and a cluster of technologically orientated SMEs is not right for every region, and that's the point I was making. The smart specialization releases you from that, and I think you're right in that the northern sparsely populated areas do not have the geographic proximity or the advantages of geographic proximity and agglomeration, but you have all these other forms of proximity, the ability to work together, cognitive proximity, the social proximity, and so on. And actually, compared with the sparsely populated areas of the UK, you have much better broadband connections and all those other sort of ICT connections. So yeah, I think there are opportunities under this smart specialization to do a different kind of innovation system.
I've seen the concept used in Norwegian regions here, and it seems to me that it's much about kind of differentiated specialization. You are in some industries or businesses where you have special advantages that which hopefully are different to some extent from your. Is that wrong, or what do you think about what do you think about the specialization
decentralisation has more in common with the old concept of comparative advantage than competitive advantage, which is why I was a little bit not sure how to handle the idea of, the original title I was thinking to talk about was regional competitiveness, and in some ways there's a slight tension there between regional competitiveness and more of a comparative advantage kind of concept. And, I think only people with the local knowledge can decide what the focus of the smart civilization should be. So there's certain obvious strengths of the regions which have been talked about a lot this afternoon.
I know you want to have to say something, but we're running out of time. We've got 2 more questions. So I might just go to them. If people can ask that question quickly, and then we'll be able to get through a bit more of the discussion before we need to wind up.
Yes, Morten Edberg. I have a question a little bit about, for some years ago, it's both to Andrew Kopus and perhaps Knut Unsager or somewhere else. And it's about, for some years ago I visited Highland and Island and a project, Inner Forth Moray, I think it was. And one of the key questions there that they've changed the political situation in the Highland and Island from some municipalities to one, Highland and Island. And what happened, as I saw it, and the problem then they started projects around, because where communities had a political and they owned the question, for one day to another they got perhaps one representative as a in some committee in Highland and Island, and then they started projects to find ways to encourage local activities. And now we have a discussion in Norway and perhaps in Sweden to reduce. We have to have larger. I say we are just 9 million. Why don't we have just one region in Sweden? Chinese quarter or something like that. But what about the question about this thing when you talk about regional strengths or local and development? Well, have you this discussion in Scotland, in Highland and Island? How can you reflect on that, and perhaps some comment from Norway?
Yeah, I'll be quite brief because I don't want to take too much time. But yeah, we have the most centralised local government and the least local democracy in Europe, I think, and it's a really big problem. I think most people are not even aware of the fact that in the Nordic countries you have small municipalities where people have a say over what the development happens in their local area. You have genuine local democracy. And whilst I realise that there are problems when you have municipalities with only a few hundred people in them, I really hope you don't go as far as we have, because we have really no genuine local democracy, and then we have to start creating other bodies to fill the gap, and then the coverage is very partial, and so on. But I'll stop there.
I think, did you want to comment as well?
Also, we didn't ask me much, but I will just...
Now you have the same discussion in Finland, of course.
Yes, we have a comment. So at the moment we have a reform that going on. So half of the municipality cost goes at the moment to social and healthcare. The idea is to reform a regional healthcare system. We don't know yet how many regions are forming, but the discussion has already been started. What is being the maybe a new reform of the municipalities going on. And then has been discussed that identity is very important in this structural change. I think the local level and regional level.
Okay, if there aren't any more concluding comments from the panel, I'm going to wrap it up there. So I'd like to thank them for their contribution tonight around business development. I'm going to hand it over to Joe Kim, who is the head of our division, to draw together some conclusions about that. Okay.
Okay, so I have to be effective because we have to wrap up quickly because dinner is at 7, I think. First thing I would like really to thank, particularly the, our colleagues from the northern Norway for the organization of this seminar and this mission. I've been, for a while in the OECD. I participated in many missions and country studies, but I think I rarely participated in a mission where I learned so much, not only about the region of the country, but also about the topic, rural development. So this is really a learning experience for me, and really I'd like to thank you for that. So perhaps just to start, kind of recall some characteristics of these rural areas that perhaps I think are worthwhile putting on the table, and also making some connections with perhaps sort of a more macro sort of perspective. Of course, things like distance, and we have been hearing a lot of sort of these issues about density over the last days here. Understanding this issue of this distance, this problem of distance, communicating this problem to people, for example, in Oslo. I've been sort of listening a lot about that. Also the issue of low density, as someone said here, the economic science has produced a lot of stuff on agglomeration economies, on the density, of the effects of density, but has done much less work on the economics of the low density. And actually we'd like now at OECD to develop more and more sort of a research program on that. But apart from these sort of characteristics that everyone understands they share, I think one very important thing that we see, for example, here in many rural regions is this idea actually that was raised by David Freshwater some time ago. Is this issue that these regions in some sense are condemned to be specialized in the tradable sector. Tradable sector means goods and services that are tradable. It means that they are exportable and they are facing competition from other regions, other countries. Agriculture products, for example, industry, resource. All these are tradable sectors. So these tradable sectors, contrary to service sectors, which are to be sheltered from international competition, these tradable sectors are under very strong competitive pressure, right? For example, if you're exporting commodities, you are faced with a world price. You are not a price maker, right? It's homogeneous goods, so the competitive pressure is very strong. So these require a lot of cost efficiency, and in order to achieve cost efficiency, you need to have productivity. So these pressures towards the reducing costs is sort of in some sense very strong. But the problem is that the more you become productive, the more you combine your labor with capital, for example, or you have achieved even total factor productivity, the more you, in some sense, you release labor. The more you become productive, the more you are releasing labor resources. And this is why our economies have been evolving from the primary to the secondary sector and now to the tertiary sector, most of our economies are actually tertiary economies. 2/3 of our economies are in the service sector. But the problem is that, in some sense, these jobs that are released from the tradable sectors, let's say from the primary and the secondary sector into the tertiary sector, have some difficulty in sort of in being allocated here in the region, because one of the main drivers of productivity in the service sector is actually density. When you try to understand the drivers of productivity in the service sectors, actually there's some studies on that, because you know that the productivity in the service sectors is something that is quite a bit worrying, because our economies are dominated by services, 2/3 of the economy, and the productivity in services tend to be a bit lower than the productivity in the primary and the secondary sector. So overall, our productivity, average of productivity in our countries, in OECD countries, has been declining very, very steadily. And now this actually is a big problem. So if density is really one of the main drivers of productivity in the service sectors, you do not find that kind of driver in this kind of regions. So in some sense, you are here in what someone in Bodo sort of explained to us, saying we call it the Nordland paradox. The Nordland paradox is that they have growth, sectoral growth. Some sectors are doing very well. They have productivity, but they are not creating jobs. So they call it the Nordland paradox, right? So how to resist to this, to this problem? So one option is to increase volumes. Increase volumes and you keep jobs. But of course, when you are, in a sector which is producing a commodity or a homogeneous type of good, it's not so obvious. Not so obvious to actually expand volumes. First of all, because when you expand volumes, you actually can have an impact on prices. When you have 10% of the market share in the salmon industry in the world, when you double your production of salmon, you are going to have an impact on international prices. Probably, either the demand goes up all the time, and then it's okay. If the demand doesn't go up all the time, actually all prices may decrease, and then not so obvious what you are going to gain in terms of this trade-off between price and volumes. So whether the demand keeps increasing or not depends on this thing that economists in a technical jargon call the income elasticity. If you have a good that is considered by people as a sort of luxury good, this type of goods, the demand tends to increase all the time when you become richer. Typically, food products are not luxury products, except when they're really luxury, like caviar or perhaps this crab that you are eating. What do they call it?
King crab.
The king's crab. Yeah. Salmon, by the way, when 20 years ago was a bit of a luxury good. I remember for Christmas I bought salmon for my kids. Now salmon, my youngest daughter makes sandwiches of salmon almost every day. She likes that. So it's not anymore that kind of luxury good, right? So you may be faced with a good which is not really a luxury good, for which the demand doesn't keep increasing all the time. The only, there's very exceptions of these goods that actually were able to both have this increase in volumes and keeping prices. For example, Champagne is one of these examples. The region of Champagne was able to increase tremendously the production, the volumes of Champagne, and actually price on a sort of long-term basis remain pretty much sort of stable, even increase a little bit. They required for that a very, very smart sort of branding type of strategy that worked. So I don't know if that kind of strategy could work for in the case, for example, of the salmon industry. So you have to be careful, right? When you sort of focus on this increase of volumes just to maintain jobs in the region. So if you don't focus on volumes, you tend to focus on product differentiation, on quality, for example, and you say, okay, if I want to make more quality out of it, I need to have innovation, I need to have human capital. And so some of these rural regions tend, for example, to focus on this need of higher education in the region. But the problem with this higher education is that most of the jobs in higher education actually go to the service sector. So you've trained people here in the higher education institutions, and it's really a challenge because they tend actually to go away because service sector is not here in the low density regions, are in big cities, in places where there is this high density. So, and also the people in the higher education education, we all have higher education, tend to be extremely mobile, so it's very difficult to make it a specific resource in a rural region. So, is this sort of a picture a bit desperate? Huh? Seems a bit desperate. Huh? So, in some sense, you are faced with a sort of a structural trend that the more you run against it, the more actually you are exacerbating it. So fortunately, the idea that actually that there is nothing you can do about it, and the only thing you can do is to compensate these low density regions, these lagging or rural regions, by providing subsidies, compensation. That kind of view now is fortunately gone. It's wrong. I'm not saying that there is no case for some differentiation, for example, of policies. For example, we had on social security contributions, actually the OECD on that side finds that actually perhaps it's better to have this kind of differentiation rather than, for example, support or subsidies on a sectoral basis. Perhaps it's less distortive to have this kind of differentiation in terms of space rather than in terms of sectors. Right? So that may happen, but this idea of compensation is gone, and as you know, the OECD has developed what we call the new rural policy paradigm. So this started around 2005-2006. Then actually this thing evolved recently. We organized the Rural Development Conference of the OECD in Memphis in the US in May this year, and actually this paradigm, it's really focusing on competitiveness, on growth, rather than subsidies. So it's sort of evolving towards things like well-being, like, for example, the linkages between rural and urban regions, something that actually was not really contemplated at the beginning. There was a bit of a kind of a almost tension between these two sort of communities. Now we are focusing more and more on the linkages between rural and urban. So this paradigm is evolving. Fortunately, we have it, and we can say without being sort of for the mainstream economists seen as a bit kind of a strange sort of considerations that yes, growth is possible in rural areas. And rural areas can be very high productivity areas, like David shows in his map, these red areas. And also these rural areas have accumulated contribution to growth in countries, which is very significant. We did work with Enrique on that, and it's true, a lot of things is concentrated in big cities, but on average on the OECD is only 1/3 of the growth. The big cities is only 1/3 of growth. Actually, 2/3 of growth are elsewhere. In other regions, can be intermediate regions, can be rural regions. But of course, each region is small, but when you accumulate all the contribution of all these regions, actually makes a big sort of share of the contribution to aggregate growth. So this should not be neglected. So what can we do? So if we take that as a sort of as an acquis. So what can we do in terms of promoting growth, competitiveness, well-being in these rural regions? So I think at the OECD we come up with some kind of key ideas. First thing is always to focus on specific assets. Absolute advantages, competitiveness, even Professor Krugman, that doesn't like the idea of competitiveness, he wrote a paper saying this is a crazy idea. At the level of the country, he recognized in a paper that he wrote actually in the conference in Scotland that actually the notion of absolute competitiveness, of absolute advantage or competitiveness is something that makes a lot of sense for actually subnational sort of entities for regions. Because any small difference in terms of, say, for example, productivity across regions within countries, because production factors are much more mobile within countries than across countries, could make huge differences in terms of development sort of processes. First of all, identify, so the policy should help regions to identify these specific assets. And for that you need to have local knowledge. You're not going to identify specific assets from Oslo or from Paris. Second element is the issue of coordinating sectoral policies. It's very important when policies arrive in one region that they are coordinated, because otherwise you don't get most of it. For example, is very important when you discuss about transportation in the northern Norway, that, for example, your Minister of Transportation be the Minister of Trade. Because after all, what you produce here is going to be, it's of course a very important component of Norwegian exports, but if, for example, there is a decline in exports of oil, replacing oil by other types of products is very important. Then, for example, this fish production is done here, right? So if the trade minister and the transportation minister get together and understand this issue, perhaps it will be easier to make your case for these infrastructure projects. This coordination across ministers and ministries is very important. Also very important in this sort of regional policy paradigm is the idea that you need to align policies across levels of government, of course, from central, regional, and municipalities. And in particular, when you have rural regions that are close to cities, is quite important indeed to have this alignment, this multi-level governance approach to align policies, say, between urban areas and rural areas. So, of course, here you are away from very big cities, but this is important overall. So, in rural areas, we have two big advantages. Is land is cheaper, and we saw that, for example, the other day we were discussing with someone that has a ferrosilicate plant, and he was trying to this produces a lot of carbon, and he has a vision saying we are going towards an economy that is going to very low carbon sort of content of the economy, and he say, how can I absorb all this carbon produced by this ferrosilicate plants in order to go towards a scenario with almost zero emissions? And he invented the connection between using the carbon, the CO2, to produce actually algae, which is a bioeconomic product. And at some point he said, of course, I can use this CO2 and produce algae, and this algae actually can be used as a food, for example, for the salmon industry. And they said, but of course these algae sort of containers need space, and we have space here. So an advantage. He can only do this kind of green growth type of idea because he has space. So space is a very important advantage. Labor may be cheaper here, although you may have a problem of skills, but capital tends to be much more expensive. And one thing is really lacking here, and we are that during this week, is the information about market opportunities. So these ideas about weak ties that David talked about, the idea about the networks that also was presented here by Ruth, is really something which is kind of very important. The entrepreneurs, the firms in rural areas tend to be less exposed to these market opportunities than a place where naturally you have a lot of interactions, a lot of connections, like in a city. So, if you take these sort of main lines of rural development, regional development, and these main characteristics of rural regions, so of course you need a sort of strategic vision here in the NSPA sort of region. I think the presentation where we were given this sort of a global, national, and local perspective was extremely sort of useful. This, I think, when you have that kind of perspective, this sort of issue of distance gets a bit sort of less problematic in some sense. Of course, here distance are huge, but when you put this thing in this global perspective, I think these issues are sort of seem less of a problem. And this is perhaps where our study can be useful, because it can sort of makes advocacy for an integrated vision of the whole region, which is certainly needed. I don't like when you oppose east-west to north-south. I don't like that. I think actually east-west and north-south should be complementary, not sort of a substitute. I think would increase a lot the return on investment on north-south state infrastructure projects, which you have a much stronger connections on the east and the west. So they should be presented in sort of an integrated way. On the infrastructure projects, I think, I see a strong business case for increasing the communications, the transport infrastructure. Indeed, if you project the salmon industry to double, even triple in 2-3 decades, you need to be able to get out these goods out of it, but out of the region. But I think David warned us in a very sort of I think convincing way that sometimes you need to be careful about the easiness of transportation and the incentives for the type of production you are doing. When perhaps you have less facility in transportation, you may also create incentives for processing things locally instead of just exporting raw materials. If infrastructure was the driver of the regional development, my country, Portugal, would be the most developed country in Europe. We have 2 or 3 more highways, not roads, highways per capita than France or Germany. And actually my country now is much more, in some sense, much more unequal than it was in the past. In Portugal, the regional inequalities are between the coast and interior of the country, and they make a lot of connections, and actually now these regions in the interior of the country are less populated, are less developed than they were in the past. Of course, it's very easy to go there, but it's also very easy to go out of there, right? So these things work in both directions. So this warning from David was quite important, and I think when you think about this, when you make the case for these infrastructure projects, I think it's very important to also present things in terms of complementarities. For example, the complementarity between all these transportation networks needed for export your products and the development of the tourism industry, for example. I think this is very important. Infrastructure, the key message is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. Needs to be presented in a broader perspective. I find that, for example, in terms of the funding component of all these, here in Norway, it's a bit strange that you don't have, for example, a bank, a development bank that can focus on these big infrastructure projects. In Sweden, in Finland, you have the European Investment Bank, right? Here we don't have the European Investment Bank. Actually, we have a lot of constraints generated by Europe, but not actually all the advantages. It's perhaps something that should be contemplated in terms of policy. In Portugal, for example, now they are using part of the cohesion funds to create a development bank. So this is perhaps something that could be contemplated here. On the issue of skills, of course, I don't know about less. I know less about Sweden and Finland, but I have a lot sort of concerns here about the problem of dropout rates, which I think is certainly a big problem. But if I compare with my country, Portugal, it's completely different. Dropout rates in Portugal means people that are dropped out and stay out. Here, people are in some sense recuperated by the system. The problem of dropout, I'm talking about northern Norway. I think I have the impression that here the people actually spend more time completing education, but at some point they get what they need in terms of the education, because we have in our well-being indicators a component which is the education, which is captured by the ratio of people with completed secondary education as a share of the labor force. I saw, this afternoon, this indicator for the northern Norway is 76%. The average in the OECD is 74%. In Portugal is 47%. So, things need to be put in a sort of in relative sort of terms. And here, I think you have very good active labor market policies that tend to kind of, follow and help people to get out of unemployment jobs. The role of the universities for this lifelong learning, I think, is very important. But when you express these concerns about dropout rates, I think we need to make a difference between countries, or really this dropout is really something which is structural in some sense, that leaves these people out of the education. On the market opportunities, what I heard here about innovation was very interesting. But in some sense, I have the impression that sometimes you are helping people that have ideas already. So one entrepreneur comes to see you, I have an idea, and you help him. But if the main problem is really this exposure to market opportunities, perhaps you should think things in perhaps a different way. And I think the presentation by Rune, showing that the role of entrepreneurs and cultural ties and attitudes of entrepreneurs was very important in this connectivity outside the region. I think this is something which is sort of worthwhile reflecting on. This idea that local interactions are not necessarily associated innovation, I think is important result, and also having this vision of the region in knowledge networks. So don't necessarily help people that in some sense don't need to be helped, because some of these entrepreneurs, we have a very strong drive, they will do it anyway in some sense. Okay, if you give a little push, it's good. But in some sense, the people that you really need to support and help are the people that perhaps are not exposed to this market, to this knowledge of market opportunities. The role of infrastructures like broadband, very important certainly, for this access to this connectivity, the exposure to market opportunities. But again, when I look from the regional being indicators of the OECD on your rate of broadband, come on, it's of course you want fiber, but great, and perhaps this is what you need. But when in relative terms, I'm in a difficult position from the OECD point of view to say you have a problem here, right? Now, you will make a stronger case again, like in the transportation and trade, if you make a connection with other sectors. For example, this is a beautiful example about distant medicine, perhaps to save costs on the healthcare sector. And in all our countries, we have this aging problem. Most of the aging, the health expenditures go to people above 65. Now it's 40% of OECD expenditures on health. By 2050, it's going to be 60%. So, if you can save a lot of money by having this sort of a medicine processes, and for that you need very, very, very fast internet connections. I think this makes a very, or at least a stronger case for investment in the broadband infrastructure. Also, setting you refer to this role of universities as connectors. I find this kind of is very important. So, just to sum, I think this is overall is extremely interesting. So for me, it was extremely stimulating sort of project. I think I hope this study is not producing a study. What is really interesting for us is kind of this interaction, and also the fact that I hope we are creating really here or helping reinforcing, strengthening this network of regions, because again, this spillover effects of a network can be extremely sort of powerful. So, first thing is that I hope this study will help making the case that rural, even remote regions, like regions we visited this week, are not necessarily projected to decline in an urbanized world, because it's true that the world is becoming more and more urbanized. I think this study could I hope it could provide a good platform for regional cooperation, and perhaps help to reinforce the attention devoted by national governments and also supranational entities like the European Union in this region, with having this sort of a global view, which I repeat, I find extremely interesting. I hope also that we'll be able in the study to find these commonalities across the three countries, but also the differences. From what I heard from Finland and what I saw this week, I think there is a lot of differences from Finland and Norway. And finally, I do hope that this study could contribute to one thing which I really it's very important is the governance side. The governance is a fundamental ingredient of regional development, tends often to be a bit neglected. I know that Nordic countries tend to be very good on cooperation, on coordination, but still I heard this week some sort of some aspects, this coordination could be sort of improved. At the OECD, we have focused a lot on the coordination around public investment, and this is a big issue because, regional governments, here, for example, in Norway, the counties, the only resource is the transfers from the central government. When the central governments are under pressure, the only way for regional governments to adjust is where? Investment. And investment is the most strategic way or role for these regional governments. And you see, for example, in Europe, the total collapse of public investment for Europe as a whole, more than 27%, in the European Union. This is dramatic. But why? Because That was the only way for regional governments to adjust from the squeezing of the transfers from the central government. So good governance and public investment, I think, is a very important sort of instrument. And we developed 12 OECD recommendations on the governance and public investment, focusing on this coordination across levels of government, on capacity at the subnational level, for example, to undertake PPPs, the public-private partnership, and also on the framework conditions. Of course, here the integrity is not an issue. You know, in some countries it's a very important issue. Budget planning, the regulatory framework. We are here some issues in Norway about actually the impact of regulations, a bit heavy regulations on business development. So I do hope that this study will be also sort of an opportunity to focus, a strong focus on these governance issues that sometimes are a bit neglected because people tend to focus on sectoral strategies, on competitiveness, and do not think about this way of actually getting more of each policy. Each policy, like infrastructure, is always a necessary condition. When you look at our data, some countries did policies, it worked, it didn't work. It's not because the policy was bad, but because other things were missing. So for policies to be both necessary and sufficient conditions to generate productivity, growth, well-being, they need to be well coordinated. So this governance aspect for us is very important. 7 o'clock, we have to go for dinner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joachim, for a great summarizing. And but you and your colleague have still a task today to go to the Russian border and take a look. And tomorrow we have a meeting with the Summit Parliament, so you are still not finished before you are on board in the plane. So this is a hard time for you, but I think it also are interesting. Thank you everybody for coming to this seminar. Thank you for the speakers. I think everybody here have had a great time and very interesting. So now it's some of you are going for a trip to the border, and some of you are going for dinner, and I think everybody will get food tonight and will have a good time later tonight. Thank you.